I'll spread my legs for shelter and food." The widow's dark eyes held no shame, no pleading, just the hollow certainty of someone who'd already calculated the cost of survival. "I have nothing else," she said, her Apache accent thick with cold. "No coin, no family, just this body. Take it for shelter and food, or let the storm finish what it started." Behind Calder, 7-year-old Annie's small gasp pierced the moment, innocent confusion meeting adult brutality in the threshold between warmth and death. The giant widow didn't flinch, didn't lower her gaze, didn't apologize for reducing herself to currency. Because when you're a widow who's been running for 6 months through a territory that sees you as both savage and freak, dignity becomes a luxury you can't afford. But Calder Brooks, widower for 3 years, rancher barely keeping his daughter fed through Wyoming winters, did something the giant widow never expected. "Keep your dignity," he said, his voice quiet but unshakable. "I'll give you both freely." She blinked once, twice, as if his words were a language she'd forgotten. "Men don't," she whispered, her voice cracking like ice breaking. "This one does," Calder answered, and he stepped aside, opening the door wider, despite the cold that rushed in, despite the shock still trembling through his daughter's small body, despite every warning his head was screaming about bringing a stranger into his home. The giant widow stood there another moment, waiting for the trap to snap shut, waiting for him to name his price, because 6 months of running had taught her that mercy always came with a bill attached. But Calder just stood there, one hand on Annie's shoulder to keep her steady, the other holding the door open against the wind that wanted to slam it shut. "Come inside," he said. "You're dying on your feet." She took one step forward, and her legs gave out. Calder caught her before she hit the floor, grunting under her weight because she wasn't just tall, she was solid, all muscle and bone hardened by survival. "Annie, blankets!" he barked, and his daughter ran, grateful to have something to do besides stand there drowning in confusion. He dragged the giant widow toward the fireplace, her bare feet leaving bloody prints on the wooden floor, her skin so cold it burned his hands. Her eyes fluttered shut, and for a terrible second he thought she'd died right there in his arms, but then her chest rose with a shallow, rattling breath. Annie came back with every blanket in the house piled in her small arms, her blonde braid bouncing as she ran. They wrapped the giant widow like they were trying to save a frozen calf, layering wool and cotton over her shivering frame. "Papa, is she going to die?" Annie whispered, her blue eyes huge with fear. "Not if I can help it," Calder said, and he meant it with a fierceness that surprised him. He heated water on the stove, forced broth between the widow's blue lips, rubbed her frozen feet until his arms ached. Annie sat close, watching this stranger with the kind of fascinated horror children feel when they see something both terrible and amazing. "She's so tall, Papa," Annie breathed. "Why is she so tall?" "Some people just are, little bird," Calder said, but even he couldn't stop staring. He'd seen tall women before, but Onata was something else entirely. 6'4" of raw-boned strength, shoulders broad as a man's, hands that could probably snap his neck if she wanted to. And yet lying there wrapped in blankets by his fire, shivering like a wounded animal, she looked almost fragile. Almost. For an hour they worked in silence, broken only by the crackle of fire and the howl of wind. Then the giant widow's eyes opened, dark and wary, scanning the room like a trapped animal looking for exits. "Where am I?" she rasped. "My ranch, Red Hawk Basin, Wyoming territory." She tried to sit up, failed, tried again. Calder put a hand on her shoulder, gentle but firm. "Easy. You're safe." That word, safe, made her laugh. It was a bitter, broken sound that had nothing to do with joy. I offered myself to you," she said, and her voice was steady now, matter of fact. "You pulled me inside. So when do I pay?" Calder felt something twist in his chest. "You don't." She stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. "I told you, keep your dignity. You owe me nothing." The giant widow's jaw tightened, and suddenly she looked dangerous again, all that height and strength coiled like a spring. "Men don't give freely, men take." "This one doesn't," Calder said, and he held her gaze without flinching. "My wife died 3 years ago. I know what it's like to have nothing left. I'm not going to take from someone who's already lost everything." Something flickered in the widow's eyes, something that might have been hope or might have been disbelief. She looked past him to Annie, who was peeking out from behind her father's chair, small and blonde and impossibly innocent. "Your daughter," the widow said. "She heard what I offered." "I know," Calder said quietly. "Annie, go upstairs." "But Papa," the girl started. "Now, little bird, please." Annie went, her footsteps slow on the stairs, and when she was gone, the silence felt heavier. The widow's hands clenched in the blankets. "Why?" she asked, and it was almost a plea. "Why refuse me? Why pull me inside? Why risk bringing danger to your home for a stranger?" "Because it's Christmas Eve," Calder said, "and because you're a human being, and because I've spent 3 years wishing someone had been there to save my wife when she needed it. Maybe I can't change the past, but I can change tonight." The giant widow closed her eyes, and a single tear slid down her weathered cheek. "My name is Onada," she whispered. "Calder," he said, "and that girl who just went upstairs is Annie, Onada." The name felt strange in his mouth, foreign and sharp. "What happened to you?" She was quiet so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke, and her voice was flat, empty of everything but truth. 6 months ago, a white man named Franklin Boyd came to my village. He was a traitor. He wanted me. My husband Thomas said no. So Boyd waited until the men were hunting, then he came back with guns and fire. He burned everything, killed everyone. My husband died trying to stop him. I ran. Calder's hands curled into fists. "And Boyd?" She opened her eyes, and they were black with hate. "He's looking for me. He thinks I'm his now, thinks he earned me by making me a widow, thinks I'll be grateful he left me alive." The fire popped and hissed. Outside, the blizzard screamed, and Calder Brooks, widower and father, rancher barely scraping by in the brutal Wyoming winter, made a decision that would change all their lives. "Then he'll have to go through me first," he said. The giant widow stared at him, searching his face for lies, for tricks, for the moment when his mercy would turn into possession. But all she saw was a tired man with kind eyes and a scar on his jaw, a man who'd lost as much as she had and somehow still believed in doing right. "Why?" she asked again, softer this time. "Because you deserve better than what the world's given you," Calder said. "And so does my daughter. She needs to see that kindness still exists." For 3 days, Onada waited for the payment to come due. She slept in Margaret's old room, the bed too short for her frame, so her feet hung off the edge, and every night she lay awake listening for Calder's footsteps in the hall. They never came. Every morning she woke surprised to still be wearing the nightgown Annie had given her, surprised her door was still closed, surprised she was still alone. On the 4th day, she found Calder in the barn brushing down his horse, and she stood in the doorway watching him work until he finally noticed her. "You haven't touched me," she said. It wasn't a question, just a statement of fact that confused her more than anything else in this strange new world where men gave shelter and food without demanding flesh in return. Calder set down the brush and turned to face her. "I won't," he said simply. The giant widow took a step closer, her height making the barn feel smaller. "I offered. You accepted by bringing me inside. That makes it a deal." "No," Calder said, his voice gentle but firm. "You were dying. Desperate people offer things they shouldn't have to. That doesn't make it right to take them." Onada's hands clenched at her sides. "I don't understand you." "Good," Calder said, and there was something sad in his smile. "Maybe that means you've been around the wrong kind of men." She wanted to argue, wanted to push him until he either proved he was lying or proved he was telling an impossible truth. But Annie's voice calling from the house broke the moment. "Papa, breakfast!" Calder walked past Onada, pausing only to say, "You're welcome to stay as long as you need. No strings, no debts, just stay." January came with cold so brutal it made the Christmas blizzard look merciful. The ranch became a small universe of 3 souls, learning to orbit each other in the close quarters of survival. Onada healed slowly, the frostbite scars on her feet turning from angry red to pale pink, her strength returning in increments that surprised even her. She'd expected to be weak forever, hollowed out by grief and cold, but the body has its own stubborn will to live. By the 2nd week, she refused to stay idle. She found Calder chopping wood behind the house, his lean frame struggling with a particularly thick log, and she took the axe from his hands without asking. "Let me," she said. Calder opened his mouth to protest, then closed it when he saw the look in her eyes. The giant widow swung the axe with a precision that came from years of frontier living, splitting the log in one clean strike. Then another, and another. Calder watched in silence as she worked through the pile he'd been wrestling with all morning, her height and strength turning brutal labor into something almost graceful. When she finished, barely winded, she handed him the axe. "I will earn my keep," she said. "You don't have to," Calder started. "Yes," she interrupted, her dark eyes fierce. "I do. Not because I owe you, Because I need to know I'm worth more than what I offered at your door. Calder understood then. This wasn't about debt. It was about dignity, about proving to herself that she could be valued for something other than her body. "All right," he said quietly, "but you rest when you need to." She nodded once, sharp and certain, and from that day forward she wove herself into the rhythm of the ranch like she'd always been there. Annie followed Onata everywhere, a small blonde shadow trailing the giant widow with endless questions. "Why are you so tall? Did it hurt when your feet froze? Can you teach me to split wood like that? Do you know how to track animals? What's it like being Apache?" Onata answered each question with patience that surprised her, because she'd never thought of herself as someone who understood children. But Annie wasn't like the white children who'd thrown stones at her in the towns she'd passed through. Annie looked at her with curiosity instead of fear, wonder instead of disgust. One afternoon, while Calder was checking the fences, Annie brought Onata a pile of papers covered in careful drawings. "I made these," the girl said shyly, "for Mama. But she's in heaven now, so I thought maybe you'd like them." Onata took the papers with careful hands, studying each drawing. Horses, flowers, a family of 3 holding hands under a sun. Her throat tightened. "These are beautiful, little bird." Annie beamed at the Apache nickname Onata had started using without thinking. "Papa says Mama loved to draw too. She taught me before she died. Did your mama teach you things?" Onata was quiet for a long moment, remembering hands guiding hers as she learned to bead, to tan hides, to read the stories the earth told in tracks and broken branches. "She taught me to listen," Onata said finally, "to the wind, to the animals, to the silence between words." Annie tilted her head, considering this. "Can you teach me? If your father allows it." "He will," Annie said with the absolute certainty of a child who'd never been denied anything that mattered. "Papa likes you. He smiles more when you're here." That night, after Annie was asleep, Onata found Calder sitting on the porch despite the cold, staring out at the snow-covered pasture. "Your daughter says you smile more," she said, settling onto the step beside him. Their size difference meant she had to sit lower to be at his eye level. Calder glanced at her, surprised. "She said that?" Onata nodded. "Is it true?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "Margaret died giving birth. The baby, too. For 3 years this house has felt like a tomb I'm trapped in, going through the motions of living because Annie needs me to." "But you," he paused, searching for words. "You brought something back. Not Margaret. I'm not trying to replace her. But life. The possibility of it." The giant widow felt something shift in her chest, something warm and terrifying. "I thought I was dead too," she said quietly. "When Boyd killed Thomas, when he burned everything I knew, I thought the woman I was died in that fire. I've just been walking around in her skin, waiting for the body to realize it should stop." Calder turned to look at her fully, his eyes holding hers in the moonlight. "You're not dead, Onata. You're the most alive person I've met in 3 years." She wanted to look away from the intensity of his gaze, but found she couldn't. What if Boyd comes back? What if he finds me here?" "Then we'll deal with it," Calder said simply. "Together." That word, together, hung in the frozen air between them like a promise neither of them was quite ready to name. February brought a false thaw, 3 days of warmth that melted the top layer of snow into treacherous mud before winter returned with vengeance. On the second night, Onata's old frostbite wounds opened, blood seeping through her socks as she tried to hide the pain. Calder found her in the kitchen after Annie was asleep, sitting on the floor trying to reach her feet and failing, because even her height couldn't make up for the awkward angle. "Let me," he said, and before she could protest he was kneeling in front of her with clean rags and salve. "This is not proper," Onata said, but she didn't pull away. "Nothing about this situation is proper," Calder said with a small smile. "A widower and a widow, living under one roof without marriage, raising a child together, ignoring every rule polite society ever made. I think we're past propriety." He unwrapped her feet with gentle hands and she watched him work, this man who was smaller than her, shorter than her, weaker than her in all the ways the world measured strength, and yet somehow made her feel safe in a way she'd never felt before. His fingers traced the scars, red and angry and painful. "You walked through hell to get here," he said quietly, "literally and otherwise." "I ran," she corrected. "I was a coward." "You survived," he said, looking up at her. "That's not cowardice. That's strength." Her breath caught because no one had ever said that to her before. Everyone who'd seen her run had called her lucky or broken or cursed, but never strong. "Do you really believe that?" she whispered. "I believe you're the strongest person I've ever met," Calder said, "and I believe these scars are proof you refuse to give up, even when giving up would have been easier." Onata felt something break open inside her, some wall she'd built to keep the grief contained, and suddenly tears were pouring down her face. She tried to stop them, tried to pull herself together, but Calder just moved closer and wrapped his arms around her as much as he could given their size difference, and she found herself collapsing into him, this small man who somehow had room for all her enormous pain. "I miss him," she sobbed. "I miss Thomas. I miss my village. I miss knowing who I am." "I know," Calder said, holding her tight. "I miss Margaret. I miss the man I was before I lost her. We're both ghosts haunting our own lives. They stayed like that for a long time, two widowed people holding each other in the darkness of a frontier kitchen, sharing grief that no one else could understand." When Onata finally pulled back, wiping her eyes, she found Calder watching her with something in his expression she couldn't quite name. "Thank you," she said, "for letting me break." "You did the same for me," he said. "You just didn't know it." "How?" "By being here. By being alive. By showing Annie that the world still has joy in it. You gave me a reason to keep going that isn't just obligation." She wanted to say something, wanted to tell him that he'd given her the same thing, but the words tangled in her throat. So instead, she just reached out and took his hand, her massive palm dwarfing his, and squeezed once. He squeezed back. And in that moment, something shifted between them, something that had been building since Christmas Eve, since the moment he'd refused her offer and pulled her inside instead. Something neither of them was ready to name yet, but both of them could feel growing stronger with every shared silence, every small kindness, every moment of understanding that passed between two people who'd learned the hard way that life could be brutal and short and desperately unfair. March arrived with mud season and restlessness. The cabin felt smaller somehow, the air between Calder and Onata charged with something electric that made Annie giggle when she caught them staring at each other across the dinner table. One evening, after a day of particularly hard work repairing fences damaged by the freeze-thaw cycle, Annie made an announcement. "I want music," she declared. "Mama used to sing and we'd dance and it was happy. Can we be happy like that again?" Calder's face did that thing it always did when Annie mentioned Margaret, a flash of pain quickly hidden. "We don't have an instrument, little bird." "I can sing," Onata said quietly. Both Calder and Annie turned to stare at her. "An Apache song my mother taught me. If you'd like." "Yes," Annie bounced in her seat. "Please, please, please." So Onata sang, her voice rough at first from disuse but growing stronger, a melody in a language Calder didn't understand, but that somehow spoke directly to his chest. Annie jumped up and grabbed her father's hands. "Dance with me, Papa." Calder let himself be pulled into a clumsy waltz around the small living room, his daughter's laughter bright as bells. When the song ended, Annie turned to Onata with determined eyes. "Now you dance with Papa." Onata blinked. "I don't know white dances." "Neither do I, really," Calder admitted. His ears were red. "We'll figure it out." There was a moment of hesitation, of awareness that this was crossing some invisible line, and then Onata stood and Calder stood, and suddenly they were facing each other, her towering height making the situation almost absurd. "I'll have to look down," she said. "I'll have to look up," he countered. They both smiled, nervous and uncertain, and then Calder placed his hand on her waist and she placed hers on his shoulder, and they began to move. It was awkward at first, their sizes making the traditional dance positions ridiculous, but then they adjusted. She lowered herself slightly. He stood taller. They found a rhythm that was theirs alone, swaying in the firelight, while Annie hummed the Apache melody. Calder could feel the strength in Onata's frame, the coiled power she usually kept carefully controlled, and something about her deliberate gentleness made his throat tight. "You're not afraid," she murmured, and it wasn't quite a question. "Of what? That you'll break me?" She nodded slightly, her dark eyes searching his. He thought about how to answer, how to explain that her size had never frightened him, that if anything it made him feel safer because he knew she could protect herself, protect Annie if she needed to. "You won't," he said simply, "and even if you did, it'd be worth it." Her breath caught, and suddenly they weren't dancing anymore, just standing close, her looking down, and him looking up in the space between them crackling with possibility. "Papa, are you going to kiss her?" Annie's voice shattered the moment. Both adults jumped apart like they'd been caught doing something scandalous. "Annie!" Calder's voice cracked. "Well?" The girl looked entirely too pleased with herself. "Mama used to say people dance close when they love each other. Do you love Onata?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Calder opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Onata stood frozen, her face unreadable. Calder started, then stopped. "Yes," he said finally. "Yes, I think I do." Onata's eyes went wide. Annie squealed and clapped. And then, before either adult could think better of it, before fear could stop them, Calder reached up and Onata leaned down and they kissed. It was soft and careful and tasted like hope, like two broken people discovering they might be able to fit their jagged edges together, after all. When they pulled apart, Onata was trembling. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "Neither do I," Calder admitted, "but maybe we figure it out together." She nodded, unable to speak past the knot in her throat. Annie wrapped her arms around both of them as much as she could manage given their size difference. "I love this," the girl declared. "Our family's perfect now. Our family." The words settled over them like a benediction. Outside, spring was coming, despite the cold that still gripped the land. Inside, 3 souls who'd been lost in their own private winters finally felt the first thaw. But neither Calder nor Onata had forgotten what was coming. Both knew that Franklin Boyd was still out there somewhere, searching. Both knew that this fragile happiness they'd built could shatter if the wrong person came riding up the path. They just didn't know it would happen in April, on a day so beautiful it felt like the world was mocking them with sunshine when everything was about to burn again. That night, as Onata lay in her too-short bed, touching her lips where Calder had kissed her, she made a promise to herself. Whatever came next, whoever tried to take this new life from her, she wouldn't run. Not this time. This time, she'd fight. April came soft and green, turning the Wyoming basin into something almost beautiful. Onata worked the garden with Annie, teaching the girl to read the soil, to understand which plants wanted sun and which craved shade. Calder watched them from the porch, his chest tight with a feeling he'd thought died with Margaret. Love. Different than before, but no less real. That's when he saw the dust on the horizon. 3 riders coming fast. His hand went to the rifle before his brain caught up. Onata saw his posture change and straightened, her height giving her a clear view of what was coming. Her face went pale. "Boyd," she breathed. "Get Annie inside," Calder said. His voice was steady, but his hands shook as he checked the rifle. Onata didn't move. "I won't hide. Not anymore." "Then we stand together," he said. Annie, appearing in the doorway with her own small rifle, added, "All of us." The riders pulled up in a cloud of dust, and Franklin Boyd dismounted with the casual confidence of a man who'd never been told no and meant it. He was tall, handsome in a cruel way, with eyes that assessed Onata like livestock. "Well now," he drawled. "Been looking for you for months, and here you are, playing house with this runt." Calder stepped forward, rifle steady. "State your business, then leave my land." "Your land?" Boyd laughed. "That's my woman you're hiding." "She's not property," Calder said. "And she's not yours." Boyd's smile turned sharp. "I made her a widow so she'd be available. Killed her savage husband, burned that village clean. Did her a favor, really. Civilized her by force since she wouldn't come willingly." Onata's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "You murdered my husband. You murdered children. You burned people alive because I refused you." Boyd shrugged. "Semantics. Point is, you're free now. Time to collect what I'm owed." "You're owed nothing," Calder said. "Last warning. Ride away." "Or what?" Boyd's hand drifted toward his gun. "A little rancher and an Indian whore are going to stop me?" The air crystallized. Then 3 things happened at once. Boyd drew his weapon. Calder's rifle came up, and Onata moved faster than either man expected, her size giving her reach Boyd hadn't calculated. She grabbed his gun hand and twisted hard enough that everyone heard bones crack. Boyd screamed. His men reached for their weapons, but froze when they saw Annie in the doorway, her small rifle aimed with surprising steadiness and Calder's gun never wavering from Boyd's head. "You made me a widow," Onata said, her voice deadly quiet. "You took everything from me, but I found something better in the ashes you left." She twisted harder and Boyd fell to his knees. "I am not yours. I never was. And if you come near this family again, what I do to you will make your village burning look like mercy." She released him and he scrambled backward, cradling his broken hand. His men helped him mount his horse. This isn't over, Boyd spat through pain. Yes, Calder said, it is. You come back, we won't. Talk first. They rode off fast, dust trailing behind them like smoke from a dying fire. When they were gone, Onata turned to Calder. Her hands were shaking now that the danger had passed. I brought this to your door, she said. I should go. Don't, Calder said. He lowered the rifle and took her trembling hands in his. Don't you dare run. Not when we just started figuring this out, but he'll come back? Maybe. Probably. And when he does, we'll face him. Together. Annie wrapped her arms around Onata's waist. Please don't leave, Mama. The word stopped everything. Mama. Onata looked down at this small blonde girl who'd claimed her heart without permission, then at the man who'd given her back her dignity when she thought it was lost forever. I won't run, she whispered. Not anymore. That night, after Annie was finally asleep, still clutching Onata's hand, Calder found the giant widow on the porch. Marry me, he said. No ceremony, no speeches, just the question plain and true. She turned to him, this man who barely reached her shoulder, but somehow made her feel safe in a way size never could. Why? Because Annie calls you Mama and means it. Because this house has been dead for 3 years and you brought it back to life. Because I love you and I don't care what anyone thinks about our sizes or our pasts or anything else. I just want you to stay. As my wife. As Annie's mother. As my partner. She pulled him close, wrapping her arms around him. Yes, she said. Yes to all of it. They kissed under the stars, two widowed people who'd found each other in a blizzard and built something neither expected. When they pulled apart, Calder said, I have to warn you, I'm not much to look at. I'm short and scarred and barely keeping this ranch running. Onata smiled, real and true. And I'm too tall and too different and come with enemies. Sounds like we're perfect for each other, he said. They married in May with just Annie as witness, a simple ceremony that felt more sacred than anything in a church. That night, in the room that had been Margaret's, then Onata's, now theirs, they came together with a tenderness that surprised them both. Will I hurt you? She whispered as they fumbled with unfamiliar bodies. You won't, he promised, and even if you do, I trust you. Afterward, lying tangled in sheets that barely covered her frame, her head on his chest despite the logistics being awkward, she said, I never thought I'd be happy again. Neither did I, he admitted. But here we are. Here we are, she agreed. Spring turned to summer. Boyd never returned, scared off by a giant widow who'd finally stopped running and a small rancher who'd proven size meant nothing when defending what you love. Onata's belly began to swell with new life. Annie was thrilled at the prospect of a sibling. And when Christmas came again, exactly 1 year after Onata had offered to spread her legs for shelter and food, she stood decorating a tree with her daughter while her husband watched from the doorway, his hand resting on her rounded stomach. Thank you, she said quietly, not turning around. For what? For seeing me as human when I'd forgotten how. He crossed to her and kissed her shoulder, the only place he could easily reach. Thank you for knocking on my door. The tree glowed in the firelight, Annie's paper snowflakes dancing in the heat. Outside, snow fell soft and clean, nothing like the killing blizzard that had brought Onata to this threshold a year ago. Everything had changed. Two broken people had found each other in the worst moment and built something beautiful from the wreckage, a family. Not perfect, not conventional, not what anyone would have predicted, but theirs. And that was enough. Onata placed her hand over Calder's on her belly, feeling their child move beneath their joined palms. She was a widow who'd offered everything for survival and found a man who gave her dignity instead. He was a widower who'd been hollow until a giant woman collapsed at his door and reminded him what living meant. Together, they were proof that mercy could change everything, that love came in unexpected sizes, that family wasn't about blood, but about choice, that even on the coldest, darkest night, one door opening could save more than one life. The baby kicked and Onata smiled. She was home. We want to hear from you. Where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Drop a comment below and let us know. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss another story that might change the way you see the world. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we almost didn't hear.